informational public briefing on the Williamsburg fire. So the way we've been doing this, we give a little update about what's going on in the fire. We have an operational update, and then we spend about 20 minutes or so answering the questions that you might have, actually. So without any further ado, I'll bring up Mike Johnson, who's one of our operations chief, and we'll go around the horn. But actually, Mike, before we do that, let me take just a minute to give a little bit of an orientation to the map here so everybody understands where we're at. So the community of Granby, Fraser, and Winter Park are in this area through here. As we come down, Highway 40 is right here. Coming up this side here is the Williams Fork River this way. This is the mill process right here. The line is out here. And I think that's pretty good. This is our fire itself, but that kind of paints a picture of where we are on the landscape. So, Mike, if you would.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mike Johnston, Deputy Operations Section Chief with the team here. So, starting off today, a lot of similar operations going on as we've had the last few days. People working in the Williams Fork drainage. We have some progress to report today. We're going to be adding some containment here close to the mill headquarters here, the processing plant out here. So we'll have a few additional percent containment. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to show, but probably around 5%. So that's some good work to the boots on the ground, the firefighters out there that have been working on this chunk. Additionally, we've been working on dozer line here to tie up this piece that's still burning down towards Williams Fork, and that dozer line was completed today. There's a little bit of more prep along that line that's needed, prep, limbing up some branches and trees so they can get ready for a firing operation on Monday. And if projected to have all this contained by probably midweek. And so progress really good. So we'll have everything contained probably almost down to Darling Creek here over the next several days. Looking good that way. Coming around to this side of the fire, we had some people in here on the Denver water improvements up by Jones Pass. They'll take probably 2 more days to get the structure protection in place for those structures out there and the improvements for the Denver water operation out in that area. Coming back around to St. Louis Creek, the major drainage here that goes through the experimental forest. We've had a dozer in here working around the headquarters today. I believe they completed that line in that area, and they're going to be moving the dozer over closer to this area and here closer to Fraser to get some of these indirect fire control lines in place that we've been looking at. They've also been scouting out this line with the experimental forest overhead out there to see what we can do to, use this as a containment line. We're also doing some point protection around some other Denver water improvements over the last day or so in there, and that's pretty well complete now. Around the rest of the fire, we're continuing to scout out exactly where we're going to put these fire lines. As a reminder, this area in here is just too hazardous for the folks to get in there direct and go on it. Put the fire out, so we're looking at these different options out here between the values around Fraser and the fire's edge, and we got some good options that we're going to be looking at working on. As far as the fire activity today, really minimal again today, so not much activity. Tomorrow it might get a little more active because it's going to be a little warmer and it's had a couple more days of drying since the last preset. The National Guard showed up today. I believe we're putting them up by Kremling. Those aircraft, helicopters that they have will be available for not only our fire, but the fires in the general area, so it'll be good to have their support. I believe that's the major updates I have to share for the day, and I'm looking forward to the questions that you have for us. Thank you.
So we'd be glad to take those questions right now. So go ahead and type them in the comments. While you're doing that, I do want to talk a little bit about air quality. So as you know, or you most likely know, the state of Colorado has a great website that talks about air quality throughout the state. And they give you a rating for that: low, moderate, unhealthy, all those types of aspects to it. So another aspect that we do as an incident when this takes place, we bring air quality people with us as well too. So what we have done is we placed a monitor in the Fraser area, but also in the partial area as well too. And they feed that information directly back to make daily reports. And And then we post that information as well too. So not only look at the state site, I believe somebody might be sharing, one of our folks might be sharing the web address for the air quality site that is very specific to this incident too. Okay, let's see what questions we have.
Hi, good evening. I'm Aaron Mayville, the Deputy Forest Supervisor here in the Arapahoe Roosevelt National Forest and Pawnee National Grasslands. We have a question here about, I'll read it here. With the dozer work complete near St. Louis Creek, do we see the forest area directly west of Fraser being opened back up to the public before September 1st? It's a question we're getting a lot, actually. And the short answer here is it's really too soon to tell at this point. We still have an active fire burning out in the area right now, so the closure's in place to allow firefighters to get the work done that they need to accomplish. And I assure you, we are assessing this every day as this thing progresses. As the ops brief just showed, we still have active fire perimeter on the north, and so it's really important that we keep these closures in place to allow firefighters to do their jobs and secure the perimeter.
So that dozer work, just to add on to what he was saying, it was only completed right here around the experimental forest headquarters, and there's still more work to be done out there as well. Quite a bit more work, which we'll be working on probably over the next week or so. But the fire, you know, the way the outlook looks for weather, this fire is not going to make any major pushes from what we're seeing that way, so we have time on our side that way. Also, the next question is about containment. We've been showing 3% containment. That's going to jump up a little bit. I don't know the exact number. We need to run the numbers, but probably around 5%. And the approximate acreage this morning was 10,400 and some change, and it'll probably go up another 100 or so. Just a little bit of activity on each side where it's growing, but pretty minimal overall. So I can touch on this one as well. Will resources be lost to the bigger fires such as Pine Gulch? And I can say that our operations section chiefs across all these large fires in the general area are coordinating to share resources and put them where the priorities are. And we have a good relationship with them. So as fire activity picks up on different fires and they have different priorities, we're trying to put these resources to the best use where they have the immediate needs. And we have really good coordination going on that way. So we're not necessarily losing any right now. We're holding steady. And those other fires are going to help us out when we need it.
We had a question here about what is an experimental forest exactly. It's a good question because we kind of throw terminology around. So, of course, on the map here we have the Fraser experimental forest. It's one of just under 20 experimental forests in the entire country. The Fraser experimental forest was started back in the 1930s. The purpose, it's a subset of the greater national forest, and it's really data. It's data collection, learning about trees, about natural habitats, and using that data for better forest management. The other value here of the Fraser experimental forest, again, starting in the 1930s, there's just a lot of trend data. There's a lot of history there. And so it's a pretty special and unique thing on the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest, and therefore pretty important value for us to protect.
Okay. I have a question here about where Sheep Mountain is on the map, and then share where the blocks will be between the fire and Sheep Mountain. And thanks for the support out there as well. So Sheep Mountain on the map is right here, just west of Fraser. The area that we're looking, this is kind of the fallback option. We're still looking at closer in options is right here. So just south of Sheep Mountain is where we would be looking at putting one of our fire control lines along Crooked Creek, which is a nice break in fuels and a place where our firefighters could effectively hold the fire.
All right. Next question here is about any update on the human cause and any more specifics we can provide. It's a common question we get. And I'll say at this time, we don't have any information to provide necessarily. And there's two things to say to this. The first is, I know it's kind of difficult to kind of hold this information and not hear specifics, but it's standard protocol when we're doing the investigation. It's very important for law enforcement reasons, for liability reasons, that these investigations are done confidentially and really complete. So at this time, we can publish it at human cause, and what we're doing is very standard protocol for these investigations. So you know, it can be tough sometimes, but that's about all we can offer at this point.
Okay. So there's a question about what we have work going on down here along Williams Fork, what we're doing out here to put in fire breaks, and that's heavy focus for a lot of our folks for apparent reasons. We want to keep the fire out of Fraser and Winter Park and all of your values out there in those areas. So we've been assessing different places we can contain the fire, and we're getting equipment in to start putting in some lines, and we're already starting to work on some of those, like around the experimental forest headquarters and stuff, and we'll be looking to move around over the next few days to start putting in some more of those fire breaks.
I'm going to take a question about firefighting resources. The question really is will firefighters stay on this fire or they be reassigned? The way we actually do that is, let's say for a hand crew, for example, they do have a certain amount of time that they spend on a fire, and then they rotate off the fire. They get a few days off, and then they become available again. They actually become available on a national basis, and they could be assigned to a different fire. But we very much track that, so we know when our resources are timing out, and we plan ahead and order people, our crews, engines, etc., to replace them. So yes, we're very much tracking that process of when firefighters will be leaving, but also ordering the necessary firefighters and resources that we need to fill in behind them as well.
All right, so I have a question about how much of the fuels within the perimeter of the fire footprint at this point have fully consumed. And, you know, as dry as the dead wood is out there, most of that's fully consuming. There is some places along the riparian areas and stuff that are wetter that haven't fully consumed, but it did burn pretty hot in some places and consumed some of those materials, but it's not completely black out there. There's some mosaic areas where it hasn't fully burned. So, reading the question here, what are the current conditions on Kaiser Ridge and preventing growth towards Lake Evelyn? So, Kaiser Ridge is up through this area, so just north of the fire, right in here. Lake Evelyn's right in this area. The conditions, you know, there's a lot of needle kill timber up there, pretty rugged country to get firefighters in there directly, and so, you know, this fire is pretty active in parts here, but it isn't really moving very fast. So there is some activity in there, just slowly moving northward, but the winds out of the northwest aren't allowing it to move very fast. So the fire hasn't got to Lake Evelyn. This point right here that's closest to Lake Evelyn is rocked out. So it actually has to burn around, and I'm not even sure if it'll be able to make it because of some of these rocky mountains all the way into Lake Evelyn, but some of this country in here is potentially going to burn over the, you know, the rest of the summer.
Next question, how big is the Fraser Experimental Forest? I'm liking all the interest in the experimental forest today. 23,000 acres is the answer, established in 1937. And if there are more questions about the experimental forest system in the country or the Fraser Experimental Forest itself, a lot of good information on the Forest Service website. Check it out.
So I'll take a stab at this next question. My Air Ops branch director is the expert when it comes to the aviation. The question is, how much water does one of the buckets under the Firehawks hold? That's one of the helicopters. Well, Blackhawks are one of the helicopters that the National Guard uses, so I'm kind of assuming that's similar. Type 1, you know, Blackhawks are considered Type 1. We have Type 2 helicopters and Type 3. So the Type 1s can carry up to around 1,000 gallons, plus or minus based on elevation. Higher elevation, we have to reduce the buckets down, make them smaller, and you know, to control the weight because they can't carry as much weight at the higher elevations. So Type 2 helicopter might be 300 to 500, and a Type 3 helicopter will be less than that, maybe down to 100 gallons. So I'm guessing right now those Blackhawks are carrying around 500 gallons plus or minus.
There's a couple questions on there about how wide are the fire lines. Well, really the question or the answer to that is they're as wide as is needed in different areas. So, you know, there's anything from what we call a scratch line, a hand line, which could be only 3 feet wide and is dug down to mineral soil. But you know, the next thing from that is we need to make that fire line much wider as well too. And it's really based on the threat of the fire that's coming in that direction. You know, as necessary, bulldozers can be used to make fire line. And of course, that's a much wider area too. So, you know, for example, a bulldozer line could be an 8-foot blade width, for example, but also to reinforce that fire line, we could remove fuels that are adjacent to the fire line too. So the answer to the question is really based on what the specific need on that piece of ground is as to how wide that fire line is.
So I'm going to take the next one here. The individual's asking about dropping retardant in a pass here between Bottle Peak and Byers Peak, and there's about a mile of timber there where it can lead up and over. And we were actually talking about that this morning. If the fire gets lined up to make any major pushes, we're going to certainly be using retardant to slow it down and, you know, hopefully keep it from coming all the way towards our contingency lines. That's why we call them contingency lines, is hopefully it doesn't get there and we can keep it in check in other places. So retardant's an option. We can also use helicopters, and we have been off and on just to keep it from getting ahead of steam to move this direction with buckets.
Mike, can you address where you guys are drawing water from?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I know that there was some beaver ponds that we were looking at in Williams Fork, and there was a KMAX, which is a Type 1 helicopter that using some of those water systems where we know the water's safe to draw from, and we're not putting bad water where good water's at. So yeah, that's. So really good questions. We have pretty savvy public out there. And so this next question is about fire growth. So the winds have predominantly been out in the northwest, which has drove the fire down here and up Williams Fork. We have a meteorologist on site, and I've been talking to her regularly to see if and when the winds will switch around to the southwest. It sounds like northwest is fairly common in this area. I'm from an area where southwest is more common, so I was thinking that, you know, Fraser was a bigger concern, and we're watching for those southwest winds, and we might see some occasionally, but we're not seeing anything significant in the forecast right now for maybe the next week that would show any southwest winds and any big concerns. And even better, they're showing some precip here over the next few days, which will help us out. And I like the next one too, and I appreciate the concern for our welfare, but our firefighters staying healthy and safe, and we're doing everything we can to keep all the firefighters safe. We're doing everything we can to keep those diseases that won't be mentioned right now out of our fire camps, and successfully doing that with mitigations that we have in place. So our firefighters are healthy and safe. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Brett Rowland, Grand County Sheriff. One of the questions that's come to me this evening is, at what point would Fraser be pre-evacuated and also evacuated? First and foremost, I'm going to refer everybody back to our gcemergency.com website. That's gcemergency.com. On that website actually shows all of our potential evacuation areas. They're labeled 1 through 16. And we work with the planning and operations staff to establish action points that are assessed for each one of these different areas. It's a little too detailed to actually go into on screen here, but the team and I are constantly monitoring those. We have a chain of communication back and forth, and should the fire change direction or behavior at any certain time, the team and I can be in contact as far as when those actually happen. It's important to understand that we work really hard to create a significant time frame so that we're not pulling pre-evacuation and evacuation orders at a moment's notice. We really work hard on that pre-planning phase, and so working with the team, we're able to do that. So know that this isn't something that's potentially going to happen in 5 or 10 minutes. We're hoping that we could do hours and even days if it gets to that point. But just as a reminder, there is no further evacuations or pre-evacuations have been ordered at all this weekend.
Sheriff, quick question. Do you know where Green Ridge is? That might help me with that question.
So it's actually we have a couple different Green Ridges here in Grand County. We have one that's up towards the Grand Lake area, about 3/4 of the way up from Granby to Grand Lake. And then we kind of learned of a new Green Ridge that I'm going to try to find it on this new map. So give me just a second. But we're somewhere up in this area, sir, right up in here.
Yeah, if the commenter could throw a little more description in there, that would help me. As far as how do you think it'll do, I'm assuming we're asking if it'll help the full fire or help us control the fire. And there is a really good ridge up here, and some of this country burned, I'm not sure when, maybe 10 years ago or so is what I was guessing. And this area is certainly going to help us hold the fire and help keep it from growing further to the north.
I'll take a question that kind of ask about fire retardant. It says, I know this might be a silly question, but why don't you just put fire retardant around the entire perimeter of the fire? It's not really a silly question, but the key word about what we're talking about is retardant. So it actually slows down the progress of the fire. It doesn't put a fire out. It's very important for when we do use air tankers putting down fire retardant, that they're actually working in coordination with firefighters on the ground as well. So again, fire retardant slows down the spread of fire, gives time for our ground-based firefighters to get in there to actually address the fire situation. Now, fire retardant has a limited time frame too. It's a wet slurry when it hits the ground, but over a time frame of 2, 3, depending on the weather, that retardant will dry out and not become effective anymore.
So there's a question about firefight activities after dark and what we do and if we do it. And yes, we do fire activities after dark. Some of those activities could include doing firing operations because it burns less intense, not as hot, and it's easier to control. And we might be doing that when we burn this little section out. We also, if the fire is close to communities, we'll be out there patrolling and potentially even fighting fire directly to keep it from coming into our communities. So it's a much more hazardous environment at night because we can't see the hazards as well. So we limit some of those activities and we only do what we need to do when we do. And right now we're really not doing much for night operations just because there's not much need at this point, but we're prepared to do so when the time's needed.
Well, I'll take a question about how often do we perform surveillance of the fire boundaries? So see if things are progressing or moving, what resources do we have for that? The answer is really everything that we have from the ground-based firefighter. They're organized into, say, a hand crew who is also working for what we call a division supervisor. And then above that, the division supervisors work for branch directors. So all our firefighters on the ground in the particular area that they're working in, they surveil the fire and give us updates and operations folks updates throughout the entire burning period. But also we have aerial resources too. One of the resources we use is, we call it air attack, and it's a plane with experienced people that are just flying above the fire at all points throughout the day. They're feeding information about what they see from above down to the firefighters on the ground too. So it's really the process that we use throughout the day, you know, to keep tabs on the fire so we know what is going on with it.
All right, I'll hit this next question on, with winds coming out of the northwest, do we envision any impacts to I-70 down here south of the fire? Here on the map, we have some X's, which are highlighting mountain ranges that should, in most circumstances, keep the fire from going down there and get to I-70. And this is a pretty big natural barrier out there that the fire should not be able to cross. But I never say never, because I've seen fire do some interesting things, but we're feeling pretty good about that down there. I'll stay up here and address what is the National Guard going to provide? Aircraft. And that aircraft's going to help us with helicopter bucket drops, water on the fires when we, so they'll be a good support for us, and not only for our fire, but the adjacent fires here in Colorado.
All right, we have a question about, have we done any assessment as to whether this fire will be beneficial to wildlife or not? The short answer is not directly, not yet. We know, generally speaking, that wildfire can do good things for wildlife habitat, reinvigorate growth, clear out dead and down, that kind of thing. We have a program called BEAR, the Burn Area Emergency Response Program, that comes in and looks at the effects of wildlife on a whole suite of natural resource kind of conditions, and that BEAR assessment will be done shortly. We haven't started it yet. It's usually an after kind of. Not quite there yet, so no full assessment just yet, but it's on the docket.
You know that one there.
We have a question here about the number of Type 1 teams deployed in Colorado historically. We had a similar question last night, just about the kind of historical context of fires in Colorado right now, specifically the Williamsport. So I don't think we know directly how many Type 1 teams and kind of where we rank right now. We will say we'll see how 2020 kind of stacks. Obviously, 2018, 2012, and 2002 were big fire years in the state of Colorado, and we're tracking all those kinds of numbers right now. So there's still some time yet to see how the historical context will shake out. We're mostly focused right now on this fire and kind of our efforts here, and so we'll see how the numbers kind of shake out.
I just read a question about seasonality, how that affects fire and the time of year, and it's a really good question. And as we get closer to fall, the days get shorter, and the burn period is basically the time of the day that fire's most active, and it's usually the afternoon. So that burn period is getting shorter and shorter, where the fire can be activity. Make its runs and grow faster during that burn period. So anytime we get precip, any time of the year, it helps us out. But this time of year, it helps us even more. So if we get some precip as predicted this week, it might buy us a week or two. And then usually by mid-September, there's another round of precip in this country, just like it is in my country up in Idaho. And that might buy us another couple weeks. So, but if that precip doesn't come to fruition, then, you know, the fire, if you have prolonged days of hot and dry, then it'll start gaining steam over those days. But right now we're not seeing any of that. And each one of these precip events buys us a week or two, and more so as we get closer to October, where we're going to be pretty close to the end of the fire season. But we never know when the end of the fire season is. It's just based on weather.
We do have a couple questions that I'll answer real quick, and these will be the last ones, and then we'll wrap things up. But there's a question in there about a helicopter that's dropping water in the Granby area. They're going to actually be stationed up there, and what's taking place there is that those helicopters are actually doing what we call proficiency drops. So no, there's not a fire that they're attacking right there. They're just actually I don't want to call it practicing, but they're just kind of honing their skills a little bit more so that when they do come out here on the fire, things work out well. The other question is about our type 1 team. Yes, we too rotate out. So we do a 14-day assignment. Sometimes we're extended to 15, 16, 17 days. But then the forest will go through what we call a complexity analysis, and something will follow behind us. You know, in some situations, our type 2 team hands it off to another type, our type 1 team hands it off to another type 1 team, or we could hand it off to a type 2 team, or we could give it back to the forest and a type 3 team is put on there. So that complexity analysis is kind of an ongoing basis, and the forest will make that decision here within the next probably 4 to 5 days or so. So that'll wrap us up, but I do want to have Aaron come back up and give us a few more words.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, just a couple things. I guess firstly, just some thanks to the team that's out here supporting the fire. It's been with us now for just over a week, and I'll say it's going to be with us for a little longer. And that's the first thing to say, is that we're getting into a rhythm here with these updates, with just kind of living with this fire right now, and really, really strong thanks to the team. They're doing an outstanding job of managing this situation, communicating with folks, communicating with the forest. And I just wanted to publicly say that. And then secondly, on that notion of this being with us a little while, we heard tonight from ops about weather patterns, season-ending events. That's stuff we can't necessarily predict, but we can commit to you that we're going to keep this dialogue going, this communication to you and the community. This community has been incredibly supportive through this whole thing, and it's real heartening to see. Thank you for the questions tonight. Thank you for your support as we go through this, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.